Hey everyone, welcome to today's live Q&A. I'm going to start by answering a question that was asked to me previously, which is how do we determine if a dog is going to make it through a service dog program or if they need to be dropped out of that program? It really comes down to, of course, each individual dog and whether or not they're able to do the tasks that's required of them in order to become a service dog. Something that's really big that we look for is whether or not the dog is interested in humans. We want a dog that's going to be very motivated to work with their human and not a dog that is more interested in their environment. Another thing is going to be a dog that is comfortable and confident in multiple environments. So we don't want a dog that's going to be skittish when they're out in public. We want a dog that's going to be able to become generalized to the training, so they're obedient in multiple environments, but also that they're able to do the service dog tasks that are required of them in these different environments. So again, it comes down to working with the dog, seeing if they're capable of these tasks. A big part of it is going to be perseverance. Hey, how are you guys? I'm seeing some of the comments coming through. Thank you very much. So again, that's what it's going to be for the service dog. It's really something that when we're working with the dog, we can kind of tell whether or not that dog has what it takes. Of course, being friendly with people, not being overly interested in other dogs and people, but again, being more focused on the person that they're providing their services for. And something that's very important to understand when it comes to service dogs, this is a common issue that we run into when we're training service dogs, or if somebody has a service dog, and that's when people come up and they want to pet the service dog. Now, people don't understand why we tell others not to pet the dog when they're working. And the main reason is we need the dog to be focused on the human that they are working with. We don't want them being focused on everything else in the environment. It's actually one of the reasons why I tell people not to allow their dog to say hi to other dogs when they're on a walk. Anytime I take a dog on a walk, that dog's responsibility is the walk. It's not an opportunity to go out and say hi to every dog and hi to every single person that they see. They should just be elements within the environment. The dog's aware that they're there, but they know that it's not something that they're going to interact with. If you have a dog and every time you take them out on a walk and when you see the neighbor's dog with their dog, you want to walk up and say hi and let every single person say hi, then when you're out and about, your dog's going to be looking around to get attention. Is that dog going to play with me? Is this person going to say hi to me? And now these are going to be additional distractions that's going to make it significantly harder when you're working with your dog. Another question that I had recently is my dog is very reactive to people and other dogs when on a walk. How can we get our dogs to be calmer in public? Okay, this is something that I'm actually kind of addressing right now with this question. So a dog being reactive on a walk, not reactive as far as being aggressive, but being overly excited to meet new people or meet other dogs. When we're working with a behavior this is why it's very important to understand the science of dog training. It's something that I talk about on a lot of my videos. If we can understand the science, then we can master the art. Now, the art is being able to separate what's different between each dog. Like, how much perseverance does this dog have? How intelligent is this dog? What motivates this dog? I'll give you a quick example. One dog, if you spray them with a water hose, they could see that as positive reinforcement. They enjoyed being sprayed with a water hose. Where another dog, if you spray them with a water hose, they're not going to like it. So for that dog, it's going to be positive punishment. And this is why we have to adjust according to each dog that we're working with. The science is always the same. So first, when I'm working with a dog, let's say I'm going to take this dog and I'm going to enter it into a stay and train program where I'm going to start working with the dog. The first thing I want to do, and of course this is what I do with any dog that I'm working with, it doesn't matter if it's search and rescue, basic obedience, competition obedience, or our family pet. We want to start with those communication channels because that's what's going to give us the ability to clearly communicate with our dogs in a timely manner when they're right and wrong. It's known as engagement training or loading the markers. That's the first thing that we're going to want to do. We're going to want to make sure our dog's conditioned to these markers. Now, there's two that I use that predict positive reinforcement. It's known as a continuation marker and a terminal marker. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this because I do have multiple videos covering this specific subject, But once we get our dog conditioned into these markers, then we want to start teaching them the concept of luring. Now, luring is important because it leads us to our next step, which is teaching a dog the concept of leash pressure. Now, leash pressure should really be called a leash cue, because once the dog is trained on it, it's not pressure, but rather a signal to let the dog know that they need to do something. And this is when we're implementing negative reinforcement. Again, don't get confused by the terminology, because people often think that negative reinforcement is some kind of punishment. Negative reinforcement, when we turn pressure on, once they comply, we turn the pressure off. That's the negative. Again, an easy way to remember this is negative means removing something from the equation. Positive means adding something to the equation. Punishment means preventing a behavior from being repeated. Reinforcement means encouraging a behavior to be repeated. So when we're using negative reinforcement, two very important things must take place. Once the pressure is turned on, it cannot be turned off until they comply. And the moment they comply, it has to instantly be turned off. Often when I'm doing in-person lessons, when we're going over leash pressure, I find myself saying at least once, turn the pressure off, turn the pressure off, turn the pressure off, turn the pressure off. Because the moment the dog gets into the position, we have to instantly turn off the pressure. When I'm teaching a dog leash pressure, my number one focus is that pressure. I have to make sure that once I turn it on, I don't turn it off until they comply. And the moment they comply, boom, I instantly turn it off. Look at leash pressure like a problem. We're presenting a problem to our dog. And then what we want to do to remove the stress that could be associated with the training is by giving the dog the answer. This is something I started talking about more in my videos because I think it's a really good analogy to understand this concept. For example, when we ask our dogs to perform a command, if we give them a verbal command, what we're really doing is we're asking them a question. We're saying, do you know what to do when I tell you sit? Or do you know what to do when I tell you down? And the dog gives us that blank look. No, I don't know what to do. Or they might give us the wrong answer. They down when we tell them to sit, or they spin when we tell them to stand. That's because they're not 100% sure on the answer yet. So when we're teaching them a command, look at it as a question. And then we provide them with the answer. And we do this enough times up until one day we ask them the question, they go, boom, I know the answer, and they jump into the position. Same thing with leash pressure. We turn pressure on, and that's a problem. We are presenting a problem to our dogs. If we don't give them the answer, then they're going to start to cycle through different solutions or different possible solutions or answers to the problem. They might bite at the leash. They might just resist, that classical opposition reflex. They might roll on the ground. This is why we give them the answer. We turn on the pressure, and then we use the food lure to guide them into the position. So present the problem, deliver the solution. Present the problem, deliver the solution. And we do this again as many times as it takes up until the point where the dog goes with the pressure. They give us the answer. So what I'm going to do right now, I actually have my computer up on the other side. So I can't see, I'm filming on my phone. So a lot of the questions after they pop up, they go away. So I'm going to pull this up over here so I can see some of the questions without them disappearing on me. Okay. Someone added something. Negative means removing. Yes, but you add pressure before removing it. So why isn't it positive? Negative reinforcement assumes the pressure has always been there, but you add it. Can you please explain? Thank you. Okay, yeah, so negative reinforcement, that's the terminology behind it. So for example, if you are going to push your dog into a sit, you apply pressure on their rear end, and then the moment the dog sits, you remove your hand. That would be another form of negative reinforcement. We are turning pressure on, but positive reinforcement is giving the dog something. So they want us to remove the pressure. That's what's reinforcing the behavior. The dog wants the treat, so we hand it to them. That's what's reinforcing the behavior. We're giving them something that they want. We're removing something that may be slightly uncomfortable. So again, if we're doing leash pressure training correctly, it shouldn't be seen as something that is stressful. Now, I'm explaining all this because when I take a dog on a walk, I want to make sure I have all of this established. I don't want to go out on a walk and the dog doesn't know markers, they don't know luring, and they don't know leash pressure. Now I'm not going to be able to communicate with them. Remember, dog training is being able to communicate with our dogs in a timely manner when they're right and wrong and giving them a clear path to success. So I take the dog on the walk. I also want to make sure that my dog understands a stay. So there is a long process to this, but if we do it correctly, it goes very, very quickly. Once I have the dog understanding those first 3 steps, then I want to make sure that the dog understands the basics of a stay. Because if we're taking our dog on a walk, they're on a heel stay or a loose leash walking stay. Now, it's a mobile stay, but it's still a stay. When we teach our dogs a stay, we want to start on the stay that is the easiest for them with the least amount of distractions. This is the same when we're working on obedience. I have a video on this. It's socializing, I forget the title, but it's socializing our dogs, but also working on obedience in multiple environments, getting them generalized to the training. So the generalization, someone wrote fix that. Oh, okay. I'll look at that once I'm done with this. So when we're getting a dog generalized to the training, that means that they can perform the obedience in all kinds of different environments. They can perform the obedience at home, at the park, if they're at the veterinarian clinic, going into the vehicle. It doesn't matter, they perform it in every location. When we're doing this, we want to start in an environment with the least amount of distractions possible. The most ideal training room to start a young puppy in is a completely empty room, no distractions. So we have the dog, and the only thing that they're interested in focusing in on is us, because we're the only interesting thing in the room. Once they become proficient at that, then we start adding new environments. Now, it's the same with our stay. What I mean by that is I like to start a stay on the easiest stay that there is. And for me, it's the climb command. Excuse me, some people call it the place command. It's just an elevated position. And the reason why I like to start on this and the reason why it's the easiest is because when a dog breaks the stay and we place them back, it's very clear to them that's where we want them to be. Now, this is also important to understand why we have 2 different markers when the dog does something incorrect. We don't want to start now. Let me take a step back. If I have a marker that lets the dog know they're going to receive a correction, that's known as a condition correction. A condition correction. Just like if we have a marker that predicts a reward, that's a condition reinforcer because it's been conditioned to be reinforcing. A marker that predicts a correction has been conditioned to be a correction, therefore it's a conditioned correction. But we also have a marker that predicts negative reinforcement. Now, the big difference between the two, if I'm teaching a dog something and they make a mistake, if they don't know the rules yet, then you don't want to correct them because it can make our dogs become, as one of my favorite dog trainers, Michael Ellis, says, it can make them become careful. If we correct a dog too early, or if we correct them for mistakes, they become cautious. And of course, that's not what we want. We want confident dogs that know how to navigate properly within our world. So when a dog is learning something, if they don't know it yet, then we want to use negative reinforcement. And again, if we taught leash pressure correctly, then it's not going to be seen as a punishment. So let's use the stay as an example. We have the dog on the stay. The moment the dog breaks the stay, I like to use the marker that predicts negative reinforcement. I use the word wrong. Dogs don't have dictionaries. You can use whatever word you like. You can say blue could be your marker for negative reinforcement. It could be It could be incorrect. It could be whatever you want it to be as long as you're consistent with that sound. So the dog breaks, I say wrong. They know that when I say wrong, I'm going to take the leash and I'm going to place them back on the position they just broke. Now I can use this in multiple different situations. Let's say you have a new baby, you have the baby's room, you don't want the dog going into the baby's room. The moment the dog steps into that room, you would say wrong. Use the leash and guide the dog out of the room. The dog tries going out the front door before given permission when stepping out on a walk. The moment the dog goes out the front door, you would say wrong. You use the leash to guide them back. The dog jumps up on somebody. You say wrong. You use the leash to pull the dog off. So now the dog is starting to understand that wrong means stop what you're doing or go back to the previous position. Once I have the dog staying on the climb stay and they're successful in that position, now I'm going to work some of the other stays. I'm going to do my sit stay, my down stay, maybe center stay. Center is actually pretty easy to keep the dog in the center position. And that could also start teaching them the concept of being in a mobile stay, maintaining a position whether or not we're moving, because it's a position. Now, once I have all that established, now I can take the dog on the walk and I can reinforce the heel stay. Also, when I go on a walk with the dog, I don't just walk. I like to incorporate obedience throughout the work. Or throughout the walk. Now, I'm not doing all kinds of different commands. I'm keeping it relatively simple. I'm doing automatic sits when halted, Verbal sits, verbal down, verbal come when called. Sometimes I'll bring them into the heel position and the heel position. That's pretty much it. But if you're on a walk and you're incorporating this obedience, it makes your dog stay more aware to you. Now, if you just take a dog out and the dog just walks in front of you, they're pulling on the leash, they're doing whatever they want, and the only thing that the leash is doing is preventing the dog from running off, now you're gonna run into issues because now the dog has the ability to focus on the squirrels, focus on the neighbor's dog, focus on the person cutting their front grass, focus on the mailman as they drive by. Now these are going to be added distractions. But if your dog has to pay attention to staying in the heel command, and your dog has to maintain focus or pay attention whether or not you're going to give them a random sit or down command, now that's going to be the primary focus. If I have a dog, I know this is a long answer to one question, but there's a lot to it. If I have a dog now being reactive to other dogs, I want to use that concept of counter conditioning and desensitization. That's where we are introducing the dog to whatever stimuli is getting them overly excited or fearful. It works for fear, it works for aggression as well. We introduce it at a very low level, gradually increase it as the dog becomes more confident, and incorporating obedience. So by exposing them to it over and over again, it's no longer a big deal. It's not something that is going to be super exciting because they see it every day. It's become a part of their normal routine. A great place to do this is the local dog park. Now, you don't want to go into the dog park. You stay outside of the dog park, and you first, this goes back to the video I was talking about earlier with socializing and getting our dogs generalized to the training. You want to stay outside of the dog park, and you want to be far enough away that you're not getting a bad reaction from your dog. If you're too close and your dog's reacting, well, you're too close to the stimuli, you have to back up, and then we're going to slowly work towards getting the dog more confident and more comfortable. Another thing that I like to do if a dog is acting up on a walk, or let's say somebody's walking by, I take the dog off to the side, I put him in a sit command, and then if I need to, I reinforce with leash pressure. If we look at things in the concept of obedience, if we always tell our dogs what we want them to do, then when they're not doing what we want, we can simply reinforce those expectations by using the leash pressure. Or if they know the rules, then we can use corrections for reliability. I do have a video that the thumbnail says if this, then that, but it has my behavioral and modification flowchart. It's a step-by-step process to identify what is the issue and then what do we have to do in order to fix it. And if you follow those steps, then you can get results. And if you're having issues, it's not because of the science, but rather being able to adjust to the dog that you're working with. Okay, let's see some other questions. A lot are coming through. Thanks for, putting down all these comments and watching. We have a good amount of people watching right now. This is excellent. Let's see. So getting the dog to be calmer in public. Yes, it does become easier as they get older. So if you have a young puppy, it's going to be more difficult. It's like doing those puppy classes. I actually recommend for people to go to group puppy classes, but not to really learn or do obedience because it's way too difficult for puppies, but rather to get them exposure and have them around other dogs. Part of socializing, it's really good. Okay, how effective is the flirt pole and drag lures for protection training? Okay. Martingale collar is used for guide dogs global. Not sure what the issue is in general. I mean, I like martingale collars. I'm not sure what the question is there, but flirt poles are excellent. When I'm working a dog for protection, which I used to do protection way more a few years back, I don't do it as often now, especially for the guys in the bite suit. I was talking to a good friend of mine, Spencer Bowman, last week on the podcast. He is a protection specialist. The guy is phenomenal in the bite suit. And when you're in the bite suit and you're working these highly trained protection dogs, it can be pretty dangerous. But flirt poles, I do like to start with a puppy in the beginning if I'm going to do protection training with them by doing what Tom Rose calls drive building. And the process for drive building is you take the dog, you put on a harness or a martingale collar. This gives the dog the ability to pull. You want to build that frustration. I do a small example of it in my video on how to teach a dog to bark with Sergio and Harley. So you want to create frustration. We put the dog on a back tie, we put on the harness or the agitation collar so they can pull, and then we start to tease them. Now I like a flirt pull because it gives me a little bit more distance. If you don't know what a flirt pull is, it's just a pole that has a rope attached to it with a toy. So you can move the toy around. Sometimes it has a basic toy. I like the ones that have like tug toys attached to it or puppy tug toys. And then we move it back and forth to get the dog excited. We're using that prey drive as well as that play drive and the frustration. Once the dog barks or they show excitement, then I move, I respond to the bark. What I used to tell people that I was working with students at the Tom Rose School, I would say, imagine that these dogs are like the cartoon Disney character Bolt. And they all have a super bark. And when the dog barks at you, respond as if you are being hit with the dog's bark. So a dog would bark, boom, oh, whoa. And the dog would see that and that would get them even more excited and more amped up. And they bark again and we move again. They bark, we move, they bark, we move, up until the point where I give the dog the bite. Now, once they bite it, I swing the toy around, they bite it, then I instantly pull to get them to hold on nice and tight. Then as I walk my way towards the actual toy that's in the dog's mouth, because at this point I want to get the dog to do what's known as a rebite. We want them to have a full bite. So this is a shallow bite. When the dog has a full bite, that would be a full bite. Now we can get the dog or the puppy to do that. So what I would do is I look away as I come in. The reason for that is too much frontal body language, too much eye contact on a puppy, that's too much pressure. It's why I always find it funny when people instinctively go up to dogs and they stand over them and they look big and they're like, hi puppy, and then they end up getting bit. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but there's a video, it's an older video of a German Shepherd police dog where the person interviewing the police officer gets really close to the German Shepherd. He's hovering over the dog. And when he steps in, the dog bites him right in the face. And if you own a dog, all you have to do is own a dog and you can identify it right away. It makes you cringe. You're like, oh, he's going to get bit. He's going to get bit. He got bit. And the news report says everyone was shocked. If you own a dog and you're watching this, pull the video up. You won't be surprised that he gets bit. It's so obvious. But that's too much pressure. So when I come in, I look away. Keep pressure on the toy so the dog doesn't let go of it. Once I get to the dog, I grab the toy and I pull. Not hard enough to pull it out of the dog's mouth, just enough to make the dog hold on tightly. Then when I'm ready, I loosen the pressure and the dog will naturally rebite. So I'm pulling, the dog's like, I gotta hold on to this toy, I gotta hold on to this toy. Then I go loose, boom, the dog rebites. Once they rebite, I pull again to make sure it's nice and tight and I keep the toy active. So it's teaching the dog to hold it. It's making the game fun. What you don't want to do is get the dog to bite the toy and then stop playing. Now it's not fun anymore. I've had people send me videos. They go, I don't understand. I can get my dog to bite the toy. Once my dog bites the toy, I release it and then he just lets go of the toy. It's because, yeah, at that point it became boring. So now that the dog has the toy, we want to keep him engaged. So just to answer that question, I don't need to go too much into protection training, but yeah, flirt pulls are great. Let's see what other questions we have. How do you build confidence on a skittish dog? So confidence building is basically putting our dogs or our puppies in new situations and making it a positive experience for them. If you notice that something is too difficult, the dog is fearful or skittish, then you want to present whatever it is that they're afraid of, but you want to do it again in a manner that's not too intense for that dog. I'll give you an example, vacuum cleaners. That's something that a lot of dogs are afraid of or they respond in a bad way. If I have a dog that is responding poorly to a vacuum cleaner, then what I do is I take the vacuum, I take it apart, at least as much as you're able to take it apart, and I introduce one item at a time to the dog and I give them a reward. So they see the bottom half of the vacuum cleaner, I give them a reward. They see the top half, the bag, or whatever type of vacuum cleaner that you're using. Now they see the entire thing put together. Now I might move it, mark and reward, move it again, mark and reward without the vacuum being turned on. Now I might turn it on and then turn it off and reward. Turn on, off, reward. So we're getting them more confident by having it be associated to something that the dog enjoys. In this case, positive reinforcement, we're using a treat. Spencer and I talked about this last week with gunfire, and this is something that he said that I hadn't done before, and I really like the idea for the dogs. When he's teaching them to get used to gunfire, he does an escape bite. So the decoy runs away, fires the pistol as the dog goes in, so they're using that prey drive to build the dog's confidence. The way I used to do it was we would have the gunfire go off far away from the dog to where it wasn't close enough it would cause any sort of discomfort or distraction to the dog while they're training. And then over time we would bring the gunfire closer and closer up until the point where the dog has been completely desensitized to it and it's not a big deal anymore. So confidence building and counter conditioning, they're very similar. The main difference with counter conditioning is the fact that the dog is already afraid of something, whereas with confidence building, we are exposing the dog to new things and we're trying to make it as positive of an experience as possible. Let's use Ari as an example. When she was a puppy, I would take her to the local playground. I would play with her. I would let her chase me. I always like taking a kiddie pool and filling it with plastic bottles or those balls that you can order, the same balls that they use at kids parks like Chuck E. Cheese and things like that. I don't know exactly what they're called, but the little plastic balls, you can fill that inside of the kiddie pool as well. And just having the dog jump through it, now they're associating these different sounds and noises with fun. They're having a good time. They're playing, you're playing tug with them or whatever game your dog likes. So it's about getting our dog exposed to all kinds of different things and making it as pleasant as possible. I had a student once that had her dog walking on bubble wrap. I thought that was a great idea. I started to incorporate that as well. Just luring the dog over bubble wrap and rewarding the dog while the dog was walking over the bubble wrap. So something as simple as having your dog walking on different surfaces, simply being in different environments. All these things are going to increase our dog's confidence. Another thing that I like to do when I play tug with a dog, I talk about this in my tug video. I always let dogs win when it comes to tug. I never win. I never want to show a dog, oh, look how big and strong I am. I can rip the tug away from you. I'm the alpha. No, it's all about showing them how big and how powerful they are. If the dog bites and rebites and pushes into me, I fall back a little bit. Like, whoa, look what you just did. Or if the dog shakes the toy, I'll throw myself across the room. It feels really silly, but the look on the dog's face when they think that they threw you across the room by shaking their toy, absolutely priceless. I mean, I loved it with Ari when she was a puppy. I played tug with her every day. And every time she shook the toy, I would fly across the room and she would stand there like a super dog looking at me, thinking to herself, did I just do that? So that's a big part of confidence building. Let's see, I want to get through some more questions. Do you know of any good service dog trainers? I have a standard poodle that is in training to be my service dog. He is starting obedience classes this week. There are a lot of trainers out there that will do service dog training. Most professional dog trainers that do service dog training, they do that on top of all their other clients, all their other responsibilities that they have. So a lot of service dog trainers, they're also doing pet dogs. They have stay and trains. They do private lessons. They're dog trainers that just do service dog training as well. Most people can train a service dog if you have the right dog and you're willing to commit the time that it takes to train the dog. Service dog training really isn't that difficult once you know what to do. And again, it's really about putting in the time. That's why if you are trying to fill out an application on a service dog website to get a service dog, the wait is usually around 3 to 5 years, give or take. And it's just because of the fact that training a service dog takes a long time and it takes a lot of commitment, because you have to do that training as far as getting the dog exposed in multiple environments. You have to make sure the dog is confident. You have to make sure that the dog understands the service dog tasks, especially when you're doing service dog training and the dog has to respond to a involuntary natural behavior that the person with the disability may demonstrate if they're having an issue, like a seizure alert dog. So the dog has to be able to do these behaviors without commands. And that can take a good amount of time. But if you have the time to commit to it, most people can train their own service dog. Again, if you have the right dog and you have, of course, either somebody to help you with the training that can give you guidance or, videos or whatever. But again, to answer that question, a lot of dog trainers do offer service dog help. And most professional dog trainers can train service dogs. Okay, let's see. Getting a German Shepherd puppy in about 7 weeks, working on fencing in my yard. Anything special I should look out for? As long as there's nothing dangerous in the yard, you should be fine. If you have anything like a thorn bush or something like that, you want to remove that. You don't want your dog getting a thorn, or if you have any cactuses in your yard, you want to get that out of there as well. You may not think it would happen, but if you have a dog, German Shepherds, for example, most of them have really high toy drive. If one of their toys goes flying into the cactus, they're not going to stop. They're going to run right into it, and now you're going to be having to deal with that. In fact, my dog Ari, back in 2017, I believe it was, I was outside playing fetch with all the dogs. This was in the desert, so they have, I don't know what the plant is called, but they have really sharp tips. And the ball flew into this plant, and Ari ran into it, grabbed the ball, and she just kept running around playing like nothing happened. Then she jumped up at me. I allow her to jump up at me. So she jumped up at me with her toy because she wanted me to play tug. And I looked down at her, and I could see the sun was hitting her directly in her eye, and I could see the thorn in her eye. Of course, my heart dropped right at that moment. You don't want to see a thorn in your dog's eyeball. So I took her to the emergency vet clinic. They said we can pull the thorn out of her eye, but she'll probably lose her eye. And I said, okay, that sounds terrible. Do we have any other options? And they said there's a specialist in Los Angeles. You can go down there in the morning. They're closed right now, but they might be able to help you. So I went down to this specialist the next day, and luckily, through surgery and miracles of modern technology, they were able to remove the thorn from her eye, clean her up, and she can see perfectly fine out of both eyes. But at that time, I also did not have pet insurance, which that would have been great if I did. A quick plug-in for Prudent Pet Insurance. I use them now. They're excellent. Highly recommend them. Their information is in the description of most of my videos, but that mistake of throwing the ball into that bush cost $5,000. And of course, it cost my dog the pain and discomfort of having that thorn in her eye. So that's not something you want. So make sure it's safe. Like, you want to puppy proof it so they're not going to chew on any wires. There's another good one. When I was a kid, my beagle, the family dog, the beagle, got into a wire into the backyard, chewed through it, and it shocked her face. And so she had to go to the emergency room. So you don't want any exposed wires, and you don't want any sort of thorn bushes or anything like that. Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, so going back to, this is another one. It's a huge issue. A lot of people run into it with the leash pulling. If you're running into leash pulling issues or your dog being reactive, remember, everything that our dogs do is based on motivation. Motivation to access something pleasant, motivation to prevent something unpleasant, or the behavior itself is fun. The good thing is, as dog owners, we can determine what motivating factors are going to influence our dog's behavior. More often than not, if I get a dog in, let's say I'm doing stay and train, which I'm currently not doing stay and train. I'm probably going to start doing it again in the near future. But when I'm doing a stay and train dog and their issues are pulling, like I said before, I establish all the communication channels up front. I want to make sure I can communicate clearly with the dog. Then once the dog knows the rules, then we can start adding corrections. Corrections is what gets reliability. This is the best analogy that I could come up with as far as how adding a correction will influence the dog's behavior. Let's say either you have kids or you're babysitting or whatever. And let's say the kid did something they weren't supposed to, and you said, okay, you're grounded, go to your room. And they're in their room, they sneak out, and you say, what did I tell you? Go back to your room. They go back to their room. They sneak out again. You say, what did I tell you? Go back to your room. Well, there's no new punishment being added to the equation. The biggest risk is they have to go back to where they already were. So there is no risk really of sneaking out. It's the same thing with our dogs when we first use leash pressure. So if I have a dog that goes ahead of me on a walk and I say wrong and I use the leash and I bring the dog back into heel position, I go loose, we start walking, good dog. Dog goes ahead of me, wrong, I bring the dog back. Dog goes ahead of me, wrong, I bring the dog back. Same thing, there's nothing new being added to the equation. all that's happening is the dog has to come back to where they already were. Now, some dogs, this is enough to get them to do what you want them to do. They go, okay, I got it, I'll listen. A lot of dogs, it teaches them the rules, but it doesn't get them to do the behavior. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to listen to us. And this is when we have to add corrections if we want reliability. If you're using a martingale collar, and I've talked about leash pops before, and I'm very careful about how I talk about corrections, because corrections are one of those things that if you use corrections and you do it correctly, it can help give you a very confident dog with reliable obedience. But if we use corrections the wrong way, then we can create more problems. I mentioned Michael Ellis earlier. He has a really phenomenal video on his psychology on dog training, and I highly recommend watching it. He talks about it at one point where if the dog... Okay, now I just lost my train of thought because I started thinking about the entire video. It's about an hour long. It's a really good video. I mentioned it earlier, if the dog gets corrected. Okay, yeah, no, I remember. Okay. All right. So he says, yeah, people say, you know, the dog, if you use a remote training collar, the dog will look fearful and scared. And he says, that's just bad compulsion. That's using corrections the wrong way. If the dog doesn't know why they're being corrected, if the dog doesn't know how to avoid a correction, if the dog doesn't know how to turn off pressure by complying, if you haven't given the dog a clear path to success, then you're going to have a very stressed out, very fearful dog. So it's not, oh, I used a remote collar so my dog's fearful. It's no, I used corrections incorrectly. So if you're going to use corrections, you have to do it the right way. And that's why there's a very strict process that you want to follow. I talk about it in the video with the behavioral modification flowchart. If I'm going to correct a dog for obedience, first I want to make sure they know the command I'm asking them to perform. So in this situation, the dog has to know a heel. How do I know the dog knows the heel? Well, when I give them the verbal command, they do the behavior that I ask them to do. Then they have to know the stay for that command. How do I know the dog knows the stay? Well, when the dog goes ahead of me and I say wrong, the dog jumps back into the heel position. Now that the dog has shown me they know the command, they know how to turn off pressure by complying, now I can add a correction to get reliability. One of the biggest signs that you have done your training the right way before adding corrections is how many corrections it takes to fix the issue you're currently dealing with. What I mean by that is when I am ready to start correcting a dog for issues that they're having, if I have to continue to correct the dog, then that usually means I didn't do the training in the beginning to a point where it was clear enough to my dog to understand what the rules were. Most of the time when we go to add corrections, the moment we give the dog their first correction, they go, oh, okay, no problem, I'll listen. And then you almost instantly have a dog with reliable obedience because now you've added a new correction or you've added a correction and now you've made the training real. So let's go back to the example of the kids sneaking out of their room. They sneak out of their room and now you say, okay, now you don't get to play video games. Now we've added a new punishment to the equation. Now they go, okay, it's not worth sneaking out. The other important factor when we're adding corrections, of course, we don't want to correct the dog too hard because if we correct them too hard, that can create fear issues. We don't want to yell at our dogs. If we yell at our dogs, that can create fear issues. And if the correction is not changing the dog's behavior and you've done all the steps correctly, then more often than not, it means the correction's not high enough for that dog. It's like trying to give a billionaire a speeding ticket that loves to speed. If Jeff Bezos loves speeding, I think I said his name right. If he loves to speed and he gets pulled over and they write him even a $350 ticket, speeding ticket, that's nothing to him. So it's a great analogy to look at how wealthy is your dog. If you have a very wealthy dog, that means your correction is going to have to be higher. So the dog has a larger bank account. A lot of dog trainers like to use that terminology. So let's say I have this dog on a martingale collar and I do a leash pop and that doesn't change the dog's behavior. Then you would have to upgrade essentially to either a prong collar or a remote training collar. Now I plan on putting together a series on the remote training collar. I've been really hesitant as far as doing that because there's a lot of things on the internet that say remote collars are terrible, you should never use them. It's the worst thing you can do to your dog is to use a remote training collar. I use remote training collars on both of my dogs, and every time I pull out the remote training collars, they become very, very excited. And they know that the remote collars mean we're going to do something fun. There's an open field close by to where I live. I take them to that open field every day. I do a little bit of obedience and I do chuck it, fetch. Every day I take them there. So the moment I pull out those collars mean we're going to have a good time. So every time they see it, they get really excited. Now, often when I am teaching someone how to use a remote training collar, they say, do I always have to use it? And I say, well, with my dogs, I always put my remote collar on my dogs anytime they're going to be off leash. That's the only way we can have true off-leash reliability is with a remote training collar. Now, if they come up with some other technology that could be better, then we can look at that in the future. But right now, the best thing as far as having off-leash reliability is going to be the remote training collar. And there's a process to teach the dog the remote training collar. Let's say, for example, you have a dog that digs in your backyard. You can put a remote collar on that dog, send the dog into the backyard, and you just sit and watch. The moment the dog starts to dig, you stimulate the collar, and then you get to be the good guy. You say, what happened, Fluffy? Did that dirt bite you? Probably shouldn't be digging, and the dog's going to associate that correction to the activity. Where most people run into issues is when they start using the remote training collar for obedience, and they haven't taught the dog, or the terminology that's used is they haven't taught the dog to be directional to the collar yet. Meaning if you correct the dog for obedience, they know that the correction came from you. They know it's because they did not listen or comply to what you asked them to do, and they know how to stop that correction from happening again. Michael Ellis calls this a phantom correction. They don't know where it's coming from. So what dog trainers do is when we are teaching our dog the remote training collar, we use the leash to give the dog direction. Like I said, I'm going to put together a series for this. I think it is something that is important. I think it will add a lot of value to a lot of people. It'll give you the confidence to have your dog off leash, taking them on hikes, taking them camping. You could have your front door open, walk outside to get your mail, not worry about your dog running off. Oh, and what I was going to say, every time I have my dogs off leash, they have the remote collar on. Now, I almost never have to use it, but for me, it's a safety net. Meaning, if something does happen, I can stop them. If for some reason, let's say, this actually happened. Okay, perfect example. About 2 weeks ago, I was out at the field, I was playing fetch with my dogs, and a stray dog came running up. Now, I called both of my dogs into heel. Charlie goes on my right side, Ari goes on my left, and we calmly walked back to the vehicle as I was watching the stray dog. It's not a good idea to see a stray dog and to go up to them. Now, of course, we called animal control so they can come out and find the owner. But with something like that, you don't want to go up because you don't want to risk getting bit. People often think that they're a dog whisperer because they owned a dog and they see a stray dog on the side of the road. I know somebody that went up to a stray dog on the side of the road and she was bit in the face, had, I think, over 100 stitches. So anytime you see a stray dog, always be cautious. Call somebody to come out and get it. Don't mess with the dog yourself. Even if you're a professional, there's high risk. And the person that I'm talking about that was bit, that person was a dog trainer. So you have to be careful because you don't know where they've been, you don't know the type of dog. But anyways, besides the point, I called my dogs to me and we were able to walk all the way back to the car. I kept watching the dog and nothing happened, everything was fine. Let's say you have an overly friendly dog, wants to run up and say hi to everybody, but your dog is really good off leash. And you say, I don't have to worry about it, my dog stays next to me, it's great. But then that stray dog shows up, your dog takes off after the stray dog, and let's say that stray dog is highly aggressive. Now you're dealing with a dog fight that could be potentially life-threatening to your dog. The dog could turn on and attack you. Dogs can kill people. That has happened. So we always want to be very cautious with any stray dog. But point being is, I was able to control my dogs. I had the remote training collar and everything was fine. Everyone was safe. So again, there is a process to do that. I do plan on putting that together, but essentially what we're doing is we're pairing the leash with the correction on the remote training collar. So then we're giving the dog direction. I talk about it in my manual. Let's say I'm going to give a dog a correction and I'm using a leash pop. I would say, no, I pop the leash, giving the dog the correction. I tell them what I want them to do, and then I help them. So I assist them. When we're correcting a dog, I always look at it this way. We say our condition correction. For me, I use the word no. No, correction, recommand, assist. So let's say you told your dog to sit and they decided not to sit. No, correction, sit, and then we assist them. I say we assist them because when you first start adding corrections in your training, some dogs, it will throw them off and they're not going to be able to comply because you corrected them. So let's say your dog knows sit, your dog sits all the time. One day you tell your dog sit, your dog doesn't sit, so no, correction, sit. And because you corrected your dog, you think, okay, now my dog's going to sit. And your dog doesn't sit, so you go, no, correction, sit. No, correction, sit. No, you don't want to do that. No, one correction, one mistake, sit, and then we assist them. So you use leash pressure or you use a food lure. You do something to help the dog. And that's how I use any correction for obedience. The dog breaks the stay. Let's say I have the dog in a down stay. No, correction, down, assist. We'll talk more about the remote training collars in the series. That's going to be a pretty detailed series, but I think it's going to be something that will be worthwhile and will be very beneficial to people. Okay. Someone said, I just finished your audiobook. Oh, the audiobook, by the way, on my YouTube channel, that's version 1. The current manual is version 3. So I've added a good amount of content. Which e-collar would I recommend? I like Dogtra and I like e-collar technology. They're both great. They both have really nice, reliable collars. I personally really like the Dogtra Arc. That's the one that I have for my dogs. It works great. The hands-free, so it also comes with a little button you can put on your hand so you don't have to hold the remote. All right, let's see. Okay, someone has a very food-motivated dog. Food-motivated dogs are great. Okay, what's the best way to use positive punishment for a 9-week-old puppy? So with 9-week-old puppies, you can use positive punishment. I usually try not to for most things. The only thing that I use positive punishment on a puppy is going to be for going to the bathroom inside the house and doing destructive or dangerous behaviors. And for me, it's a leash pop on a martingale collar, a light leash pop, not very hard. And also, like I said earlier in the video, when we are adding corrections, make sure you are not yelling. Corrections should not be seen as something that's personal. It's cause and effect. The puppy bites the furniture, no, correction. The puppy stops biting the furniture, good, nice job, buddy, excellent, very good. So they don't see anything as bad. They just get a correction, they're like, huh, what? Oh, I'm a good puppy, okay, great. And we're telling them good puppy when they stop doing the behavior. Of course, you wouldn't want to tell them good puppy while they're chewing on the furniture because that's going to have the opposite effect. This is something I talked about in my how to stop a puppy from biting video. If they're biting on your arm, now I usually don't correct puppies for biting. It goes away most of the time. If they enjoy biting, it can continue beyond that teething period at 6 months. Like Ari will run around, she'll jump up and she'll play bite my arm. I've been doing it with her since she was a puppy. It's part of the game, and she doesn't bite hard at all. Like we were doing it the other day, there's nothing on my arm. She has really good bite restriction, and it's something we've always been doing. If it's not something that you like, then it is good to correct right away. So the moment that the puppy bites, no, pop on the leash. We start at very low corrections and we increase as needed for each dog. So you don't want to correct too hard. What if aggressive bite from a 10-week-old puppy? Most of the time, puppies are not going to be biting aggressively. The only time I've seen that with a puppy has been resource guarding. So a young puppy resource guarding food or resource guarding a toy. And if that happens, what I do is I like to do what's known as the Superman technique. The Superman technique, let's say I have a dog that resource guards food and it's a puppy. I would reach my hand into the dog's bowl where they have their food, and I would let the puppy bite me. And I would just sit there and ignore it. Not a big deal, it's a puppy. Once they stop biting, then I remove my hand. So I'm showing them that the aggression doesn't work. Now, if you have a young puppy that is resource guarding and you go to grab whatever it is that they have and they bite at you and you pull back, then that's going to make the issue even worse because you have just shown the puppy that the aggressive behavior is going to deliver the desired results. So by doing the Superman technique, I just keep my hand there, the puppy bites me. Once they stop biting me, then I take my hand away. So they go, oh, well, first of all, you're not trying to take my food. Second of all, biting didn't get your hand to go away. And the most important factor is once they stop biting, that's when we remove our hand. So often when a dog wants something, we show them how to get what they want by doing what we want. And in this situation, it was not being aggressive. Once the dog was acting out that behavior, good dog, my hand goes away. And then I can practice doing that. I did a video with my friend Bethany, another excellent dog trainer. And it's a technique that works really well if you have a dog that has issues with resource guarding. While they're eating or while they have their toy, you slowly bring your hand towards them with something of added value. So another piece of food. So that way, when the hand is coming towards them, they're not worried about you taking away what they currently have, but rather you're adding to whatever it is that they have. So now they see your hand as value. This is one of the reasons why I also recommend not to use your hand as a correction to the dog. So knife handing dogs or heel kicking dogs, that's bad because we don't want our body parts to be seen as something that is potentially dangerous to our dogs. Anytime my hands go towards my dogs, I want that to be something good. I'm going to play with them with a toy. I'm going to pet them. I'm going to give them a treat. We want our hands to always be seen as something positive, never as something as a punishment. Again, like a knife hand or something like that. I've seen people do that. That can cause a dog to become aggressive, and it can cause a dog to lose trust in us and be afraid of us. So of course, that's something we don't want to do. Okay, let's see. Lots of questions. Sorry, give me a second. I'm trying to read a good one. Okay, so one involves two dogs, two shepherds, a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. So the male loves to play fetch, but when they play together, the female tries to chase the male in frustration. Let me see, my female tends to just chase him in frustration, barking, biting. Okay, so the female, the 8-month-old female is still a puppy, and it sounds like she just really doesn't know the game yet. If I'm gonna be playing fetch and I'm gonna have multiple dogs, I wanna make sure each one understands the game. So in this situation, what I would do is I would take the female out and I would get her to really understand and enjoy the concept of playing fetch. That way, when we're playing fetch with both dogs, she's gonna know, okay, we're playing fetch. This is what we're doing. We're not doing any other activity. It could also be because she enjoys chasing the other dog more. She enjoys chasing the German Shepherd. It's something that I've seen quite often as well with dogs that I would have in for board and train. I would have the dogs out playing with all the dogs, playing fetch with my dogs, and whatever dogs also enjoy playing fetch. And some of the dogs just want to chase the other dogs. That's what that dog enjoys. Remember, our dogs do behaviors based on what is most motivating. And for her, it seems like the most motivating activity is chasing the other dog. That's become a game for her. So again, I would go back, I would play fetch with just her, make sure she understands the game, make sure you have some good obedience, and then play with both dogs together. If you're still running into issues, then you need to go back a step and work more with the female separately. But you have to be able to reinforce expectations, so the obedience is going to play a big part as well for that. Okay. German Shepherd barking from some days during training. So barking, I'm not 100% sure if I understand that question, but I'm going to assume that it is based on getting a dog or teaching a dog maybe a quiet command. This is something that a lot of people want to know is how do I teach a dog to be quiet? The best way to teach a dog to be quiet is to use the command. Let's say you want to use the command quiet. If you use that as a condition correction. So what I mean by that are markers. If we're talking about markers, in order for a word or sound to be a marker, it must predict one of the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. That's your positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. If you have a sound that predicts one of those, by definition, it is now a marker. No, for the dogs that I train, predicts positive punishment. So no becomes a marker. It's a condition correction. If the dog does something we don't like, we say no, and we give the dog a correction. So what I mean by that is I treat quiet the same way. So when the dog barks, quiet, then I give the dog a correction. Every time the dog barks, quiet, correction, quiet, correction. And I continue to do this up until the point where the dog barks, I tell them quiet, and they instantly go quiet. Now the dog knows the command. Once I say quiet, they know they need to be quiet, and now I can use quiet without having to correct my dog. That is the fastest, most effective way to teach the quiet command. I've seen videos out there where you can teach the dog to bark, and the moment the dog's not barking, you say quiet, and then you tell them good dog. That doesn't really teach them quiet, and it doesn't really work. The most effective way, like I said, they bark, quiet, correction. And as I said, once you tell them quiet and they stop barking, now you've taught the dog the behavior. Just like any other command we're trying to teach our dog, remember the process for teaching a command. First, you want to make sure your dog knows the markers. Then you want to make sure you can present a physical cue that guarantees the dog will do the behavior. Once you have a physical cue, in this case the correction, guarantees the behavior that you want, then you could teach the dog the command. The command always comes before the physical cue. Just like I said earlier in this video today, questions and then answers. The question comes first, which is the command. The answer is the physical cue that guarantees the dog will do the behavior. So sit, then lift. Down, then lure to the ground. Heel, then guide into the position. And we continue to give them the answer up until the point where we ask the question and they give us the answer before we provide it for them. And it's good to look at it that way because just like if you were to ask somebody a question, you can't give them the answer at the exact moment you ask the question. You have to give the question first and then you can follow it up with the answer. It's the same with our dogs. If you deliver the question at the exact moment you give the dog the answer, I talk about this often in a lot of my videos, it's known as overshadowing. If 2 things are presented to a dog at the exact same time, whatever is more relevant to the dog is what they are going to focus on, and they're going to completely ignore the other element. So it has to be separated by about a half second or so. Now, just because the dog knows the quiet command doesn't mean that they're going to be quiet every time you tell them quiet. And if that does happen, then you go to what Tom Rose calls 3 times in a freebie. And that's if you're using this type of training. 3 times in a freebie. What that means is if my dog now knows the quiet command, my dog barks, I tell my dog quiet, and my dog's quiet. It's fine, it's working, let's say for a couple weeks, then one day my dog barks, I say quiet, my dog ignores me and continues to bark. The next 3 times I give my dog the quiet command, I'm going to give my dog an automatic correction. So I'm going to go back to using the physical cue to teach the desired behavior. Dog barks, no, correction. Dog barks, no, correction. Later on, dog barks, no, correction. Or sorry, quiet correction, quiet correction, quiet correction. Then after the 3rd one, on the 4th one when the dog barks, I say quiet and I don't correct. As long as the dog is quiet, now the dog is back on freebies. That's why it's called 3 times in a freebie. Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, so this one is a 9-month-old pit boxer mix. Can do tricks, leash pressure pretty well with the martingale collar, but they cannot get him to calm down and stop jumping up on people new. So in my video where I talk about teaching a dog not to jump up on people, I use the same technique that I use when I'm teaching a dog not to go into a certain room, not to jump up on furniture, when I'm teaching the stay, and I use the marker that predicts negative reinforcement. So when my dog's meeting new people, I let them know my dog's going to jump up. When my dog jumps up, stop petting. I'm going to remove my dog. Once my dog has all four paws back on the ground, then you can go back to petting my dog. Okay, great. Now I walk up, the dog jumps up, they stop petting, I say wrong, I use the leash pressure to cue the dog off. I do this over and over again up until the point where the dog jumps up, I say wrong, and the dog jumps off. Once the dog does that, then I can add positive punishment just like everything else to get reliability. So now the dog jumps up, but instead of saying wrong, I would say no, I give the dog a correction, then I tell the dog what I want, off, then if I need to, I can use the leash pressure to cue the dog off. So now there's a consequence to jumping up. You wouldn't want to use a remote training collar. One of the rules that I tell people to follow if you're using a remote training collar is to not use the collar when the dog is actively engaged with another human or animal, meaning the dog is touching another human or animal. Because if we use the remote collar in that situation, sometimes the dog may think that it's the other human or the other animal doing that to them, and they can become aggressive towards that human or that animal. So that's why we want to use a leash and collar. Now, if you had a remote collar on and you had the leash, and you pop the leash at the exact moment you stimulated the collar, that would probably be okay, but I would more likely than not stay away from that as well, and I would just use a leash pop. That's going to help get the reliability that I want because now there's a consequence to jumping up. But again, you have to make sure that your dog knows the rules before you add a correction. If you add corrections too soon, you can create a very cautious, fearful dog that's worried about doing behaviors because behaviors can be dangerous to them. So we want to make sure they know the rules. How to prevent dog from jumping up on couch. That goes back to what I was just saying. I start with the leash pressure, dog jumps up, wrong, I cue the dog off. I continue to do that until the dog jumps up and I say wrong, and the dog jumps off on their own. Once they show me that, next time they jump up on the furniture, I'm gonna add a correction. So now they jump up, no, correction, off, and then I use the leash to cue them off. Something I am asked, because a lot of times when I talk about corrections, I just say correction. A correction for the dogs that I train is either a leash pop or a stimulation on a remote training collar if the dog is already trained on the collar. We have to go through the process to teach them the remote training collar, but that's a correction. I don't like to make corrections personal. That's why I tell people to not use your hand. Don't hit or smack a dog or kick a dog or anything like that, because that's going to create fear issues. A non-personal correction with a leash pop is usually all we need, or the remote training collar, again, after the dog's been trained on the collar. Okay, let's see what else we have. So as you guys can see, at least with the questions that I've answered so far, a lot of the solutions follow the same process. And this is why I put together that one video on the behavioral and modification flowchart. If you follow the correction correctly, you should be able to fix most problems. And if you've added corrections and you're not getting results, that could mean a few things. Either the dog is unaware of what you're telling them to do because your timing is off, or the correction is not adequate to the dog's bank account. So you're giving them a correction that's not high enough to get them to stop the behavior. So for example, let's say you have a dog that's doing a behavior that needs a $150 ticket to get them to stop the behavior, and you're giving them $10 tickets. That's not enough to get them to change the behavior. The correction would have to be higher. Okay. Okay, so how would you apply hand corrections when you need to? The only time if I do need to use my hands to correct that the dog doesn't have a collar on or something like that is I might grab the dog's scruff to move them. So that would be the most that I would do with a hand correction. Again, you want to avoid anything like smacking or hitting dogs or anything like that. So I'll give you a quick example. I don't remember what I told my dog Ari to do. This was a few years back, but she didn't listen to me. I grabbed her scruff and I moved her. I just made her do it. So that shows her, like, I don't care if you don't want to do it or not, and if you don't have a collar on, you're gonna have to comply. It was something like she broke a stay and she didn't want to go back to it. I don't remember what the situation was, but I just reinforced it. And again, I treated it like anything else. It wasn't personal. It was cause and effect. Once she was doing what I wanted, good girl, nice job, way to go. Again, we always want to make sure we have a really good, strong relationship with our dogs. All right. Someone who said they just found my channel this week. Well, thanks for checking out the channel. If you are new to the channel, I recommend checking out my video, Everything You Need to Know to Train Your Dog. That's basically my basic obedience series condensed into about 2 hours and 40 minutes. So that was the smallest I could condense it. It was actually recommended by somebody. I don't know if this person has watched the video or seen it, but somebody recommended it in my comments. They said the basic obedience series is a little overwhelming. If you could put it into a more condensed video, I'm sure that would be much appreciated. I did, and people have really enjoyed it. So if you're watching and you're the one who recommended that I put that video together, thanks for the recommendation. Okay, what else? All right, someone's asking about their dog as far as not being aggressive towards other dogs. If you have a dog that is aggressive and it's a learned behavior, that's going to be easier to work with than a dog that has aggressive genetics in a sense. Now, you can work with any dog that has aggression issues as long as it's not too extreme. I actually talked about it in one of my videos, the 10 different or 10 myths or 5 myths, I don't remember, of dog training. One of the myths is you can train every dog or every dog is trainable, which is not true. Unfortunately, there are some dogs that have such extreme issues. The example that I talked about was in a book that I read recently, For the Love of a Dog by Patricia McConnell. I think I'm saying her name correctly. She's excellent. Actually, I got the book over here. Now, I'm not going to go grab it. I got my light set up. I'm going to knock it down. But For the Love of a Dog, excellent book on understanding emotions with our animals. And there was a situation that she had where when the dog was only 5 weeks old as a puppy, the owners had given it cocaine as a joke, and it just fried the dog's brain. And by the time the dog was older, it was so aggressive and so uncontrolled, like they just couldn't control this dog. It was really a liability, and it was because of the trauma that the dog experienced at such a young age. So that can happen. But anyways, going back to the dog on dog aggression. If I have a dog that is aggressive towards other dogs, this isn't going to be the answer that most people like, but I just keep the dog away from other dogs. The dog doesn't like other dogs. And this dog is a Malinois, I believe. I lost where the question was. But Malinois enjoy interacting with their humans. They enjoy playing tug. They enjoy doing different games, fetch, things like that. So if I have a dog that's aggressive towards other dogs, again, I'm just going to keep that dog away from other dogs, and I'm going to make sure I play with that dog enough, give it enough interaction with me, and make sure it still lives an enjoyable life. The reason why I say this is because in order to work with a dog that is dog aggressive, you have to expose the dog to other dogs. And for me, I don't think it's fair to put other dogs that are really nice and friendly to other dogs in a bad situation where they might be bitten or have a bad experience, and now we have another dog with issues. So that's why, for the most part, I work on the dog's obedience, and I try to mask the aggression with obedience. But again, my goal is not going to be, I want to get this dog to hang out at a dog park and play with other dogs. That really wouldn't be very realistic. And some dogs just don't like other dogs. But I'm sure this Malinois enjoys hanging out with you. So again, I would be doing tug with this dog, playing fetch, interacting, and I would really keep the dog away from other dogs. Now, if the dog is reactive towards other dogs and I don't have any interest in getting the dog to play with other dogs, but I want the dog to be more reliable with obedience, then I would go back to what I talked about earlier in this video, and I would do obedience at a local dog park, but not inside of the dog park. Again, I would be outside of the dog park, far enough away to where my dog's not reacting in any sort of negative manner, and I would work my dog in that situation. Then over time, I would get closer and closer to the dog park to where I'm using that concept of desensitization and my dog becomes used to seeing other dogs, but not interacting with other dogs. And that's a good place to do that because the dogs are not going to be able to run up to your dog because you're going to be outside of the dog park. The other dogs are going to be inside of the dog park. Some of them might try to look to check you out to see what you're doing. But once they realize they can't engage with you, that's going to be boring for them and they're going to go back and play with the other dogs inside of the dog park. So that's a good way to get a dog desensitized to being around other dogs. But again, I wouldn't have that dog actively trying to engage with other dogs. Some people will try to do muzzle training. They'll put the dog on a muzzle and then they'll put the dog into an environment with other dogs. That's not always the best either because now that dog's going to be very stressed out. It's going to try to muzzle punch other dogs. Other dogs might react in a negative way now towards that dog. So again, for me, obedience is going to be key and playing with my dog away from other dogs is also going to be key. All right. What else do we have? Okay, so I see one asking about, and right now I'm just looking at the questions at the bottom. So many questions have come through at this point. If I missed your question, just put it in again and I'll try to get to it. I'm probably gonna do another 15 minutes or so. But this one is, how do I make my 5-month-old puppy lay down? So it says lay down on his front legs. I'm assuming you just mean having the dog go into the down. So sometimes dogs will resist the down. You'll try to lure them into the down position. A lot of you watching have probably ran into the same issue before. The dog's head goes down, but their back end stays up in the air. They don't want to lay down all the way. The first thing I try to do if I'm working with a dog like that is I will look at how we're holding the food. So if you're holding the food as a bowl, I have a video where I talk about this. It's titled Power Steering. The way I hold food is I cup it in my hand. So I put it in my hand, I cup it. This gives the dog a nice valley to place their muzzle into. One of my other friends, Allie, she tells people to make their hands a little taco. But the dog is able to place their mouth into that valley where the food is. And now I can use it to start guiding and manipulating my dog into different positions. When I do it down, if you bring, let's say that the bottom of the phone is the ground, or the screen rather. If I bring my hand down and I'm treating it like a bowl, then the dog is just going to be able to place their muzzle into it and eat the food. And their back end will often stay up. That's why if you've seen my video, How to Teach Your Dog to Lay Down, I create a cave. So again, the bottom of the screen is the ground. This way the dog has to bring their muzzle underneath the cave in order to get to the food, which when they do that, it naturally will bring the back end down. Now, even that won't work on every dog. If that's the case, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all the other commands. Easy one, sit, get the dog to walk forward with the food lure. Then I'm going to teach the dog leash pressure with the sit and walking forward because I have the lure for both of those. And then I will use the leash pressure to teach the dog the down as well. Now, ideally, of course, we want to be able to get the dog to go into the down by using the food lure. But again, some dogs may not do that. The other thing that I like to do is if the dog still doesn't want to bring down that back end, and if you try to push, the dog moves away and they don't want to continue trying, another great option is to have a handful of food. When you lure your dog down, give them one piece at a time. So what happens is we're feeding them one piece at a time. The dog is taking one piece and the back end is still up. Then they get tired of having that back end up and they lay down. The moment they lay down, I mark and I open my hand and I give them the rest of the food that's in my hand. The reason why I do that, if you have a dog that has low perseverance, they'll give up. And I've seen it really more often than not. You try to lure the dog into the position, the dog tries to go for the food, and they go, too difficult, and they walk away. If that's happening, again, we want to give our dog rewards for putting in the effort. That's why I like to have my hand filled with food. And then once the dog lays down, I give them everything that's remaining. And that teaches them, oh, if I go right into the down position, I'm going to get to the reward way faster than if I take one piece at a time. Okay. All right, now I lost where I was. So many questions coming in. Okay, so recall, I saw one with a recall. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm trying to get to them all. If you're having issues with recall, just like with any other command, if you know your dog knows the command, if you taught them leash pressure, and they have been given a clear path to success, they know how to turn on pressure by complying, then you could add corrections. So when I first teach a dog the recall command, I start with the dog directly in front of me, and I do the backwards follow exercise. And this is where we just walk backwards and we give the dog food as we're walking backwards. When we stop, we lift our hand up, which naturally gets our dog to look up. Once they look up and their butt hits the ground, we mark and we give them a piece of food. Then I start building distance. I call the dog to me and I present the same physical cue that I was using for the backwards follow exercise. And we just add distance. And then once the dog starts to understand it, we can start to remove the physical cue. So the come when called is a little bit different than some of the other commands where we use a physical cue. Let me give you an example. If I'm doing the down and I'm luring the dog into the down position, I'm just luring the dog into the position. It's a very straightforward command. You say down, the dogs drop into the position. So you say down, lure, yes, reward, down, boom, the dog does the down. Great, we taught the command. But with a come when called, if you're doing it the way that I like to do it, a lot of competitive dog trainers like to do it this way, is the come when called is not just come to me and run right past me or jump on me or do something like that. It's come to the sit front position. And the sit front position is the dog is directly in front of us, as close to us as possible without touching us, looking up at our face while sitting. That's going to be the sit front. So I like to call the dogs into that position. And that's why I lure them into the position, making sure that my hands are centered to keep them nice, centered, and straight. So when we start adding more distance for the come when called, you call your dog, come. If you haven't done the physical cue enough, the dog will start to come to you, but they may not know to get right into that perfect sit front position. So I read the dog as they're coming towards me. I stand with my hands down, I go, come. As I'm watching the dog, if I notice they might need a little bit of help, then I help them with that physical cue to get them right into that sit front position. And I continue to do it, and as I watch the dog, you can see whether or not they're going to be going into that sit front position or if they're going to be maybe off to the right, off to the left. You can see that they're not doing it exactly the way that you want, then you assist them in the process. And over time, you'll get to the point where the dog comes on in and they do that nice sit front position. So to answer your question though, if I know the dog knows a command, first of all, we don't want to give our dogs commands that we cannot reinforce if they decide not to do it. This is why I teach every dog that I work with informal commands. Now, what's an informal command? We have formal commands and we have informal commands. Informal command is going to be something like, come on guys, let's go. All right, my dog's just sat up because of that. But an informal command is going to be that. It's very informal. The formal command would be the come or sit or down, something like that. That's very formal. Informal commands, I don't reinforce. If I tell my dogs, come on guys, let's go, come on, and they don't come, it's not a big deal because it's not a command. But if I tell them come or down or heel, now that's a command and it must be reinforced if they choose not to do it. So if I notice that my dog's starting not to come to me when I call them, let's say the dog's in the backyard, doesn't want to come inside. Well, with my dogs, I'm going to use the remote collar because I can reinforce it with that because they're already directional to the collar. If the dog wasn't directional to the collar, then I'm going to use a long line. So now I can tell the dog to come to me. If the dog chooses not to come to me, I can say no. I can pick up the long line, give the dog a correction, recommand, and then assist the dog back to me. They have to know that you're going to follow through. Don't make the common mistake of asking your dog to do certain behaviors and then not reinforcing it because you don't feel like it because of whatever. You know, the dog's outside, you don't want to go outside and get him. You're sitting down, relaxing on the couch, you tell your dog to down, your dog doesn't lay down, and you're like, forget it. Now the dog's starting to learn in certain situations they don't have to comply. So anytime you give a command, make sure you can follow through and you can get the dog to do it. Okay, so someone's asking about getting their dog comfortable with gunfire. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but that was more towards protection training. If you want your dog to be comfortable with gunfire, you're not doing protection work, maybe you're working with a hunting dog, or you live near a gun range or something like that, then what you want to do is you want to go to the place, so I would use a gun range. Go to a local gun range. If there's one nearby, go far enough away outside of the gun range where you can hear the gunfire, but it's not loud enough that it causes any sort of discomfort to your dog. And then play with your dog. Do some obedience. Just get them to associate that sound with fun. And again, you're far enough away that it's not so loud that it's creating stress. And then every day, get closer and closer and closer to the gun range, up until the point where you're right next to the gun range and your dog doesn't care and your dog wants to play, because that's what you've conditioned your dog to. They hear gunfire and they go, oh, this means we're playing. But again, that's why you want to start far enough away where if you start too close, it's going to be too stressful. So start far away, and this could take a good amount of time. It really depends on the dog. Some dogs you might be able to progress within a week, and the dog's perfectly fine with gunfire. Other dogs may take a couple months. So I just pay attention to the dog, I read the dog, and that's going to determine how quickly I'm going to move closer to the gun range to get the dog desensitized to it. And what I mean by reading the dog, if I bring the dog out and let's say I'm 150 yards away from the gun range, day one, dog's great, no issues. The next day I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try 100 yards away from the gun range. And I try and my dog's doing this. I'm trying to engage with my dog. Let's say you're me and I'm the dog and you're trying to play tug, and normally I'm jumping up, I'm having a good time playing tug, and I'm doing this. I'm looking constantly in the direction of the gunfire. Okay, I progressed too quickly. Let's go back to 135 yards. So that's what I mean by reading the dog. If they seem like they're uncomfortable in the situation, that means you've progressed too quickly and you need to go back a step. Okay, let's see. If an adult dog barks to someone and a puppy gets scared of people because of that, how can I bring back confidence to the puppy, and how to help a dog terrified to extreme? Okay, so dog going into an elevator. If we are working with a dog that has fear issues, again, counter conditioning and desensitization is going to be your best friend. And really, again, what that means is you're exposing your dog to whatever it is that they're afraid of, but at a low enough stimuli that you're not getting a bad reaction. So the elevator could be the same as the vehicle, the car. If you look at my Q&A video that I posted about 2 weeks ago, there's one where somebody was having issues with their dogs going into the car. You would just want to change what it predicts. So if I have a dog that's afraid of the elevator, I'm going to take the dog to the elevator and I might do a little bit of obedience, give them some treats. Again, I say obedience because if you do obedience correctly, the dog should enjoy obedience. Obedience should be fun. Obedience shouldn't be, oh, this sucks, I don't want to do obedience. No, it should be fun. So I say it because it should be fun and we're using something the dog enjoys. So I would take the dog to the elevator, I would open the door, I would play with the dog, and then I would leave. I wouldn't even have the dog go in. I would get the dog used to seeing the door opening and closing. Then I would go to the elevator, I would walk in, and then I would walk right out. I wouldn't have to wait for the dog to close. I'm gonna build the dog up over time, showing them that it's not a scary place. Just because we're going to the elevator doesn't mean that we're gonna be going into this room where the door closes. And then when it does, when we do that, then I wanna make sure I'm only going one floor. Let's say you have to travel 6 floors, that could be too long of a duration when I actually start to go into the elevator. And the first time I go into the elevator, hopefully no one pushes the button on a different floor, but I would close it and I would open it right back up and leave. So I would do that a bunch of times, get the dog comfortable with that. And then I would go 1 floor at a time, get the dog comfortable with that. And then eventually we can get to the point where the dog has no issues going into the elevator. But for anyone watching, if you're having any fear issues, definitely check out my video on fear and aggression. But it's all about counter conditioning and desensitization. That's what we want to use with any dog that has fear issues, and often same thing with issues that fall under aggression. Someone said OS, OSS. Yeah, so if you ever see OS, that's a jujitsu thing. So those that do not do jujitsu, I highly recommend jujitsu just as much as I recommend dog training. If you're watching this and you've never tried jujitsu before, go to a local jujitsu club, give it a shot. You won't regret it. It's one of my all-time favorite things to do next to dog training. Okay, let's see. 14-week puppy seems very skittish and scared with leaving the front door and will pull and go crazy to go back inside. So that's going to go back to counter conditioning, desensitization. If I'm using leash pressure, I have to make sure the dog understands the leash pressure first. With a young puppy, 14-week-old puppy that doesn't like to go out the front door, I'm just going to carry the puppy. I'll walk out, let the dog check out the area, I'll walk right back in. I'll get the puppy used to that to where it's not a big deal. But yeah, if we start to try to use something like leash pressure for something that the dog is really afraid of, it could make it worse. So going back to that counter conditioning and desensitization. I'm going to see what other questions are. I don't want to spend too much more time on fear issues. That's going to be the main approach. That's what I'm going to say for most issues when it does come to fear, and it does work when you use it correctly. And again, if you notice that you're having issues, often it's because you're progressing too quickly. Okay, this next one is increasing a dog's perseverance. So if a dog has low perseverance, we can increase perseverance through success. So success builds success. It's something Tom Rose used to always say in class. Excellent dog trainer. If you don't know who he is, he's the founder of the Tom Rose School. That's where I went to school for 2 years to become a professional dog trainer, and I was an assistant instructor there. Tom Rose is awesome, incredible, incredible dog trainer. But that's something he used to always say, and it stuck with me. Success builds success when we're working with our dogs. For example, one of the exercises that they have in Schutzen, it's known as, people call it Schutzen. It's IGP now. For a while it was IPO. But Schutzen is a sport that is separated into 3 categories: protection, obedience, and tracking. And in the obedience, there's what's known as a send out. You walk with your dog in heel, pull it up. You guys can see some really awesome videos on it. There's some phenomenal trainers out there that have some really beautiful send outs. And they take about 5 paces, and then they tell their dog run, or whatever their command is, and the dog takes off. The dog just runs straight. Once the dog runs a certain distance, the judge will give the handler, I think they give him the handler a signal, or they just tell the dog to do it. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to double check the rules. But anyways, at one point they have to give the dog the command down. So they down, and the dog has to just lay down mid-run. What Tom Rose he still does when he's teaching send outs and he's teaching recalls, he has this wire that goes over the top of the field. And then he has a leash that comes down that you can hook onto the dog's collar. And what it does is it prevents the dog from running too far left or too far right. So they learn to run straight. If they start to run too far to the left or right, the leash brings them right back. It doesn't hurt them, completely safe. And it works so well that anytime he tells the dogs to run, they run perfectly straight and center, and they never veer off. And that's just an example of success builds success. So going back to perseverance, if I notice I have a dog with low perseverance, they give up easily, then I'm going to make sure I give them a ton of small wins if needed. Another good example, I was talking about the down earlier. A lot of dogs with lower perseverance, if you try to get them to do the spin command and you try to lure them into a circle, they'll start to turn. If they don't get the food within the first few seconds, they give up. They go, ah, that's too hard. If I notice that as I start to lure the dog, yes, reward right there. I start to lure, yes, reward. I start to lure, yes, reward. So before I can even get the dog to do a full circle, I've given them about 15 rewards just for doing partial of the exercise. So perseverance will increase as the dog is successful. If you notice you're trying to get your dog to do something too difficult for them, and they're giving up, then you have to make sure you give them wins for putting in that effort. And if you're out there and you have a dog with super, super high perseverance, then you're lucky that you have a dog with high perseverance, because high perseverance dogs makes it so much easier to train. You know, for example, my dog Ari, her perseverance is through the roof. She'll just continue to try until she's successful. And often that makes it very easy when teaching her new behaviors. Okay, biting clothes, doorknobs. So destructive behaviors. Anytime I have a dog doing destructive behaviors, I correct the dog in the act. Again, if we're using corrections, we don't make the corrections personal. So if I have a dog, I know the dog chews on furniture. Number one, we set dogs up for success so we can reward them the exact moment they do the behavior correctly, but we also set them up to fail. So we can correct them at the exact moment they do the behavior that we don't like. If I know the dog is destructive, let's say there's a certain blanket that the dog has already gotten to, chewed it up, I'm gonna have that sitting out. I'm gonna wait till the blanket or the dog goes to it. The moment they go to it and they go to bite it, no, correction. They stop biting, good. Let's say your dog chews on shoes. I'm gonna have a bunch of shoes laying out. The moment the dog goes to the shoe, no, correction. And I'm gonna correct the dog for trying to do those behaviors. If I'm dealing, again, with destructive or dangerous behaviors, I correct those right away. I don't want the dog practicing it. I'm not going to try to just redirect it, because redirecting those types of behaviors do not stop the behaviors. If you have a dog that chews on furniture and someone says, oh, just give your dog a different chew toy, that's gonna stop the behavior. No, it's not. It's giving the dog a new option. You're saying, hey, here's something you could chew on. But the dog goes, oh, cool, I could chew on that and I can chew on this. Now I have two really cool things to chew on. That's why if they're doing it, I just correct it. If you do it right away in the very beginning, they don't continue to practice it and it quickly becomes an issue of the past. So that's how I stop destructive or dangerous behaviors. Okay. Someone said something about hand feeding. Can you talk about the importance of hand feeding is for training? Now, when it comes to training our dogs, you'll see different videos or blogs where people will say things like you can train a dog without rewards. I personally say to steer clear of that, unless you want to be a tyrant. So if you want to be a dictator and you just want your dog to listen and you don't want to pay them, then you can do those different options. But for me, using rewards, using treats, that's going to be the foundation of the training. Now, I posted a video not too long ago about how to train without treats, because we obviously want to get our dogs to a point where we can get them to do behaviors without always having to be rewarded for every single behavior. And I have it broken down into 3 stages. When I'm first teaching a dog a new behavior, I'm doing continual reinforcement. Also, we can use food for different behaviors, and in addition, it builds a strong relationship by training our dogs with food. Anytime our dog is experiencing something that they enjoy, they're going to associate that with whatever they're doing. And what I mean by that is, if you have your brand new puppy and you're doing what myself, a lot of other trainers, and just people in general that are training their dogs like to do, is we like to use mealtime as training time, meaning we make the dog work for every bite of food. Now, this is only in the beginning. Another example, both my dogs, they have a raw diet, they eat their raw food, and then if I'm gonna train, I might use some freeze-dried dog food, and then I'm gonna use toys. So they're still getting rewards while training, but they're not getting as much as they were in the beginning, because in the beginning, we're using that continual reinforcement. So what I mean by what I was saying earlier is, the dog enjoys eating, they enjoy training, and they're doing both of these activities with you. It is really strengthening that bond. They're having a strong positive association to the training because of the food, and they're also associating that to you. And now you're gonna have a relationship with your dog that other people are gonna be envious about. You know, often people see me with my dogs and they're like, they're so focused on you, they love being around you. How'd you do that? Well, just with training and using that food. It gives us the ability to do free shaping exercises. It gives us the ability to do fixed shaping exercises, which are excellent techniques to teaching different behaviors. And going back to spacing out those rewards, or how do we get to the point where we don't have to give the dog a reward for every single correct behavior. The 3 stages that I've broken it down to, this is what works best for me. When I'm teaching a new behavior, I'm doing continual reinforcement. That means every single time the dog does it, they're getting a reward. Once the dog is no longer having to be given the physical cue to get them to do the behavior, meaning you tell the dog down and the dog lays down. You don't have to lure the dog into the down. Then you move to stage 2. So now every time your dog does the behavior correctly, you're going to do one of two things. Either you're going to mark and reward just like you were doing at the very beginning with that continual reinforcement, or you're going to give your dog verbal praise, verbal feedback. So now it's going to be, instead of down, yes, reward, down, yes, reward, down, yes, reward, it's going to be down, and you might say yes, reward, or free reward if you're using free as a terminal marker, as I do. Or you might say down, good boy or good girl, nice job, excellent, giving them that verbal praise. Then we're going to do that for about 2 weeks, and we'll move to stage 3. Stage 3, when the dog does the behavior correctly, you're going to do one of 3 things. Either A, mark and reward, B, provide verbal praise, or C, say nothing at all. And then eventually you're going to fade out A and B until you can get the dog to do multiple behaviors without having to be rewarded on every single correct repetition. But you still want to give your dog the reward. I usually will reward my dogs after doing anywhere between 5 or 10 different commands, and then I'll throw in a reward. Remember, when our dogs are doing behaviors, I've mentioned this I think 3 or 4 times in this video, it's always based on motivation. So when you ask your dog to do a behavior, they have to either A, think that if they do the behavior, they might get a reward. B, they like doing the behavior, it's fun, so it's a self-reinforcing behavior. Or C, they have to believe that if they don't do the behavior, there will be a consequence. And if we have those 3 elements in play, then we will have very, very reliable obedience. Okay. Another one with puppy biting. So that, I would just recommend checking out my video on puppy biting. I usually ignore it. It doesn't bother me. Some people don't like it because it could be pretty painful. If that's the case, usually correction is the easiest way. There's a couple other techniques that I talk about in my puppy biting video. Okay, so let's see. Somebody's black lab jumps up and punches new people he meets out of excitement. He's great with people and dogs. Apart from that, how can we train him out of that? I talked about that earlier in the video. I don't know exactly where, but I would recommend checking out my video on the behavioral and modification flowchart. Just to answer it quickly, I first teach what the dog is not allowed to do, using that marker that predicts negative reinforcement. Once the dog knows the rules, then I can add correction in order to get reliability. Now, this has actually been a pretty long video so far. I was only planning on doing 30 minutes, but to be honest with you guys, I love talking about dogs. So if people want to listen to me talk about dogs, I could do it all day. It's one of my favorite things. That and jiu-jitsu. Love both of those things. So if you've been watching this entire time, which if you have, thanks. I know it's a long video. You'll notice that a lot of what I'm talking about is very, very similar. If we know the structure, then we can deal with any issue. And that's why in my manual, I'm sure a lot of people have it. If you're watching my video right now, and you send me an email within the next 10 minutes, I'll send you a free copy of my dog training manual. But chapter 7 in my manual, it's the step-by-step process to teach a dog any command. It does not matter if you are working with a puppy, if you're working with an older dog, it doesn't matter what you're training your dog to perform, the process is always the same. And that's why anytime I'm talking to somebody about dog training, I try to stress the importance of understanding the science of dog training, because the science stays the same. What varies between each dog is going to be things like their motivation, their perseverance, their temperament, their disposition. These things are going to vary across the board, but the science remains the same. And that's why it's so important to understand the process. Now, I'm sure a handful of people watching this video right now are either in the military or they're prior military. I was in the military for 8 years, and what works in my brain is having a step-by-step process. I need structure. I need to know, if this happens, what do I have to do? And that's why I came up with that step-by-step process. Step 1, teaching the markers. Step 2, teaching the dog luring. Step 3, teaching leash pressure. Step 4, teaching the command by using the physical cues that we established. Step 5, using the leash pressure, the physical cues, and the markers to reinforce and teach the stay. And then after all that, we can add corrections for reliability. And that transfers over to behavioral issues as well. I know that's obedience, But remember, with behavioral issues, we don't have much when it comes to behavioral issues either. We have fear, aggression, destructive, dangerous, and behaviors we just don't want our dogs to perform. That may not be dangerous or destructive. You may have a couch you don't want your dog to go on. The dog going on the couch, for the most part, is not dangerous or destructive unless it's, a leather couch that the dog might scratch, or you're worried about the dog making it dirty. But for the most part, it's not really a dangerous or destructive behavior. And then we know how to approach each one of these issues. So anyone that is running into any sort of issues, because I'm going to be ending this video here very shortly, check out that video, Behavioral and Modification Flowchart. It's going to show you exactly how to deal with any issue that you may be running into. And then the video on everything you need to know to train your dog. It is almost 3 hours, but that does cover that step-by-step process that I talked about. If you could watch that video, fully understand it, and go out and practice with multiple dogs, you could even become almost, it's going to take a little bit more experience and training, but that's almost enough to even go out and start training dogs professionally. I'm not saying it is, but it's close to it as far as putting in the practice, because it covers a lot of that science. Okay, we got enough time for maybe a couple more questions. All right, so that's a tough one. Someone's asking about aggression with certain people or uncertain people. So what I think you mean is it's aggression that the dog is demonstrating to people where there are no signs that the dog is going to be aggressive. I think that's what you mean. I'm not completely sure, but sometimes you can have a dog that may be aggressive to certain people and not aggressive to other people. A lot of times it could be maybe a past experience, not always the case though, because that's something that every dog trainer, if you're a dog trainer and you're watching this, you can agree, I'm sure. There's been more than one occasions where somebody has told me that the issues that they think their dog is having is due to being abused. Just because a dog has fear issues or does certain behaviors doesn't always mean that they've been abused, but sometimes it can mean that. Like if a dog is aggressive, has selective aggression towards certain people, it could be because of a past experience. Another great example was in that book I was talking about earlier, For the Love of a Dog. There was this golden retriever she's talking about in the book. I don't remember the name of the golden retriever, but it was a family dog. They never had any issues. Very sweet, loving golden retriever. And the family went on vacation. They asked one of their friends if they could watch the dogs. They said, no problem, they'll watch the dog. They had a 12-year-old son, and that 12-year-old son was teasing the dog. I think the son was like pulling the dog's fur, messing around with the dog. The kid thought it was funny, and it affected the dog. And then after that, that dog was becoming reactive towards men. And they didn't understand what it was. Or like, this dog has always been good with people, and now the dog is acting out in a way that we've never seen before, and it's directed towards men. Well, it's because of the experience that the dog went through before. So just like people can have PTSD, dogs can have that as well. So if I'm working with a dog that is unpredictable when it comes to aggression, then that's something where I look at it as safety is always priority number one. If I have a dog that has unpredictable aggression towards other dogs, I keep the dog away from the other dogs. I don't think it's worth risking another dog's well-being to try to, socialize this dog that is unpredictably aggressive. And more often than not, the behaviors are predictable. It's just most people aren't good at reading certain signs that dogs have. However, if you own a dog and you've owned a dog for multiple years and you've had multiple dogs throughout your life, you're probably much better at reading these signals than you may give yourself credit for. For example, we have dogs that will, oh yeah, and I didn't tell people my email address, just my name at gmail.com, nateschoemer@gmail.com. Put in the subject line, just write manual in all caps so I can see it really easily, and I'll send over a digital copy of the dog training manual. Chapter 7 covers that step-by-step process that I was talking about. And again, that's just for like the next 10 minutes. If you send me an email tomorrow, I might still give you a free copy. But anyways, and then if the dog is having, again, bad reactions towards people, then for me, if I need to socialize that dog with other people, I'm going to do it with other dog experts. just because a lot of people don't know how to act towards a dog that may be aggressive, may have certain fear issues while reacting, and some dogs will bite for no reason at all. In fact, I talk about this in my manual. I had a dog that I was evaluating, and it was a much larger dog. It was a Mastiff mix. And I break down how I deal with dogs that have fear and aggression issues when I do stay and trains with them. And I'll be honest, it is pretty scary doing this with a dog that is aggressive. So this is a larger dog. She was really aggressive inside her crate. They dropped her off. She was in the crate, so I hadn't even had her out of the crate yet. And I sat next to her for a few hours, just getting her comfortable seeing me. And then what I did was I opened the crate and I let her come out. I had my phone so I could watch her through my phone, so I wasn't using any direct eye-to-eye contact, because that could create aggression if you're dealing with a dog that's already aggressive. And so I was watching the dog through the phone. She came up to me and she brought her nose right next to my leg and was just staring at my leg, which that was a little stressful. And I waited there. Eventually she walked away. I took her outside. I had her outside. I was able to start working with her. Everything was going great. I turned away and I started to walk away from her. And as I was walking away, she came up to me and she bit my back. In that situation, I knew I pretty much had two options. If I try to continue walking away, more likely than not, she would continue to bite. The second option was to turn around, grab her collar, and try to control her. So that's what I did. She bit me. I turned around, I grabbed her collar, she bit my hand, and then I held her, moved her away, put the leash back on her, put her back in the crate. Everything was fine. Once I turned around and grabbed her and she bit me and I continued to hold on to the collar, she kind of realized that it wasn't going to work, and she was doing more of what I like to call bluffing. I talk about this in my manual as well. And it's where they'll act out certain behaviors in order to get a certain response from the human. And if it doesn't go as they had planned, then usually that behavior goes away. So I don't know what she was trying to do when she bit me, but when I went to grab her collar and she bit my hand, she did not bite my hand that hard. It was a small little mark. Wasn't a big deal at all, but it could have escalated into something worse. Sorry, that's just a random story that I started to tell. Like I said, I'll talk about dogs forever. Someone else was asking about my email again, nateschoemer@gmail.com. Serious fetch, struggling with border collie puppy. Do you have any advice? I've tried everything. Okay, playing fetch with a dog. I think that's what you're asking. Fetch is great. So this is going to be the last question that I'm going to ask. Dogs get anxious around my cat and whines. So the cat one, okay, I'll talk about that one too. Okay, last two questions. All right, so playing fetch. I think you're asking about teaching your border collie to play fetch. If that's the case, what I like to do with dogs where not every dog is going to play fetch, but if the dog does have toy drive, if the dog enjoys playing with toys, then more often than not, you can teach the dog fetch. I should probably make a video on this as well. You want to have two people for this. It helps with the exercise. You have one person holding the dog, have the dog on a harness or an agitation collar. Again, an agitation collar is a really, really thick collar that the dog wears so they can pull without putting too much pressure on their neck, since it distributes the pressure. You have someone holding the dog, and then you have the other person having either the like a ball on a rope. The flirt poles work great for this. And then what you do is you tease the dog. The other person that's holding the dog, I'm going to try to explain this well. You have one person teasing with the flirt pole, one person holding the dog with the harness or the agitation collar. As you're teasing with the flirt pole, when the dog becomes excited, the person that's holding the dog allows the dog to pull towards the toy very slowly. So the dog's pulling and you're kind of going with the dog as the dog's pulling. Once the dog gets to the toy, then you keep the toy active in the dog's mouth by using the flirt pole. You just do little tugs like this just to keep the toy active so the dog wants to hold the toy. Then you and the other person, I like to call this a victory lap. You have the dog run in a circle. So the person that's holding the dog with the harness, they run in a circle, and then the other person runs while keeping the toy active with the flirt pole. You run in a circle and you go to where you want the dog to bring the toy. Once you get to that point, then the person handling the dog, as long as it's a friendly dog, it's a puppy, so shouldn't be an issue, pick the puppy up from the back end. That'll get your puppy to naturally drop the item. You don't want to pull it away from the dog because that could create more problems. But by lifting up their back end, I do it in the video on how to teach your dog to bark. I did it with Harley, and she was about a year, a little over a year at that point, and no issues. Pick up the back end, that gets them to drop the item. Once the puppy drops the item, pull it away from the dog using the flirt pole, and then you go out into the field where you would throw the toy, and then you have the person drag back in as you're teasing the dog with the toy. Once they get to it, same thing, you keep it active in their mouth, you do the victory lap, and you bring the dog back to where you would throw the toy. You continue this up until the point where the dog it teaches a dog to want to get the toy and want to possess the toy, which is part of playing fetch. And those of you that have a dog where you throw the ball, they'll chase the ball, they'll grab it, and then they'll drop it right away, you know what I'm talking about. You're like, great, I could play fetch, but my dog doesn't bring the ball back. He grabs the ball, sets it down, and now I have to walk over and get the toy. So this helps with that as well. Like I said, I need to make a video on it so it's a little easier to understand. Explaining it is kind of difficult, but I think you can kind of get the idea, I hope, off of that explanation. I forgot what the other question was. Someone said, you're crazy, man. I guess I can be if you mean with dogs. How do you not stress the freak out when that happens? Oh, with the biting you're talking about? Yeah. I mean, I've been bitten a couple times. If you're thinking of becoming a dog trainer, if you're going to become a professional dog trainer, that's part of the risk of the job, being bitten. I've been bitten a few times. It's never fun. It happens less and less the better you are as a dog trainer, but sometimes it could just happen. I'll give you guys one last quick little story. I was working with a dog that was fearful. I taught the dog how to follow a lure. I started to teach the dog leash pressure the same way I do in my videos. I apply the pressure first, then I lure the dog into the position, turn off the pressure, give the dog the food. So when done correctly, there's almost no stress associated with the training. So I was doing that with the dog. When I first start teaching leash pressure with the dog, I get down at the dog's level. I don't stand over them because I'm trying to alleviate any additional pressure. I want to make it as easy as possible for the dog. Also with dogs that are fearful, I'll lay down on the ground where they're more towards my feet and I'm farther away from them, again, to remove as much pressure as possible. I'll take the leash, I'll slide it under my foot, and then I'll start to use my hand to pull. Once the dog feels the pressure, I'll use the food, again, to lure the dog into the position, turn off the pressure, give the dog the food. Well, for some reason, once I started applying downward pressure on this dog, he or she, I don't remember, decided to stop following the lure. I was able to do it for the sit. I was able to do it to get the dog to walk forward. But once I started to apply the downward pressure, the dog did not want to follow the food. The dog didn't want to budge. So this was an in-person lesson. I told the person, I'm like, well, unfortunately, we just have to wait. We have to wait until she lays down. So I didn't add any additional pressure. I just stepped there, I stayed there, and we hung out and we chatted for a little bit. I was answering questions that she had about dogs. And about 5 minutes later, the dog did what I called a Hail Mary. She started to jump up. She didn't want that pressure anymore, and it wasn't very hard. It was very light. And then she bit my leg about 3 times as I had the leash there. And I was wearing shorts. I always wear shorts. So I had the pressure. She bit my leg about 3 times, and I just kept it there. I just waited. I didn't react. I just waited. And then after that, she realized the biting didn't work, so she stopped biting me, and then she laid down. Once she laid down, I turned off the pressure. I was like, good girl, nice job, or good boy. And then we were good. We were good. No more issues after that. I was able to get her to follow the lure, follow the leash pressure. Everything was great. Now, if I had released the pressure when she bit my leg, then I would have taught her that biting will prevent her from having to complete the task. And that's what I told the owner. If I had allowed that biting to work, I would have been doing you a huge disservice. I had to take the bites. It was a small dog, so the bites weren't that bad. But again, once she stopped and then she laid down, I turned off the pressure and rewarded her. I was able to show her, like, look, I'm not against you. We're on the same team. I'm working with you towards a common goal. And after that, it was amazing. No more issues at all. But yeah, I mean, sometimes if you're going to be a professional dog trainer, getting bit could be part of the risk. Someone else asked, what's my option on a raw diet? I feed my dogs a raw diet. I think it's the best way to go. I've had a lot of clients that have had issues with their dogs, health issues, like they had, they had skin issues, and they were put on different types of diets. All these other diets were not working, and we put the dogs on a raw diet, and almost every single time they were switched to a raw diet, a lot of the issues went away. Now, I'm not a nutritional expert when it comes to dogs. I've done some studying on it. I really like, I believe her name is Dr. Rhonda, or I'm drawing a blank right now. Let me see. I think it's, oh no, all right, so I'm thinking of someone else. I was going to say Dr. Rhonda Patrick, but that's a different doctor. All right, let me see. Okay. Dr. Karen Becker. Okay, I don't know why I was drawing a blank on that. Dr. Karen Becker, I really like her. She has some really great videos. One, if you look up best and worst dog foods, she breaks down what she believes is the best and worst. And she's an expert in that field, so I watch her videos. I study the stuff that she puts out. There's a documentary on food for dogs that I recommend to people. It's called Pet Fooled, F-O-O-L-E-D, Pet Fooled. If you have a dog, I recommend checking out that video. Now with the raw, my dogs are on a pre-made raw dog food. I switch them through different brands. So I've used Steve's on them. I've used small batch, Tucker's. There's different brands. I buy the pre-made raw ones simply because if you're going to prepare the raw dog food yourself, then you really have to make sure you know what you're doing, because if you prepare it yourself, it could be the worst or best thing you feed your dog, according to Dr. Becker. So, all right, I think that answers that. I would check out her videos. Does your training work for pit bulls? The training works for every breed. Every breed. The process works if you do it correctly. Again, I talked about it on my myth video. Not every dog is trainable, but that's a very, very small percentage. We're talking 0.0000001% might not be trainable, but 99.99999% of the dogs out there are trainable, and the process that I teach works on all the dogs. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the only process for training dogs. I've done, actually, let me rephrase that. I've had a couple friends of mine go through NEPO-PO training, which is negative, positive, positive. Any dog trainers watching, you may be aware of what I'm talking about. NEPO-PO was developed by Bart Bellin, and that's a different style of training that is supposed to be really, really good. Like I said, some of my dog trainer friends have told me a little bit about it, but I haven't personally taken any of his seminars. But Bart Bellin, if you look him up, B-E-R-T B-A-L-L-O-N, I think, or B-E-L-L-O-N. Unbelievable dog trainer. I mean, his dogs are incredible. A really good one is Dog Training Without Conflict. I want to take this guy's course too. Ivan Balabanov, some of you might be familiar with him. Another incredible dog trainer. We're talking, he wins titles on a regular, I think he's won the world championship 3 times or maybe 4 times in Schutzen. Incredible dog trainer. So there are different styles out there, but again, this Dog Training Without Conflict, another great course that some of my friends have done and they've told me about. I need to do it myself. All right, but anyways, I think that's good for today. Someone asked what belt I am in jiu-jitsu. I'm a really, really good blue belt. So I've been doing it for about 3.5 years, but with jiu-jitsu, I've transferred to many different schools. So I've trained at, I started at a Gracie gym, then I did 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu in San Diego under PJ Barch. Then I was 10th Planet Burbank. I was at 10th Planet Pasadena for a while. 10th Planet West LA. I was at another Gracie gym in El Cajon. So when you bounce around a lot, you don't get promoted very quickly. I've competed a few times. I think I've competed 5 times in jiu-jitsu. If you look up Nate Schoemer, BJJ, you can see some of my matches. I'm not the best, but I love it. I do love jiu-jitsu. It's a lot of fun. What treats or food do you use during training? So if I have a dog on continual reinforcement, then I'm using Stella and Chewy's freeze-dried coated kibble. If the dog is no longer on, someone said 3-year blue belt as well. Awesome. Yeah, and it really doesn't matter what belt you are. I mean, as long as you enjoy training and you have fun. If the dog is no longer on continual reinforcement and they're on their main diet, then I'll use freeze-dried dog food for their training treats. In fact, this is a good time for me to mention, I'm actually going to be releasing a dog food here. I'm hoping within the next month. We have our first batch made. It's going to be called Ari and Charlie's Premium Cuisine. We're doing freeze-dried dog food primarily for training. We're starting with one protein source. So we're starting with salmon and turkey. The main ingredient is salmon. We have it made. We have 618 bags, I believe, made. I would have made more if I could, but you know, I wish I was rich, but I'm not. And starting a dog food company is not cheap. So starting with one protein flavor, I will be announcing it once it is available. So it's going to be very, very similar to Vital Essentials. I love Vital Essentials. So that's something I use with my dogs often. So a lot of what we're doing is based on Vital Essentials. And hopefully it'll be available, like I said, in about a month. It's going to be online orders. And as it grows, we'll add more protein options to it. But again, I'm starting with all freeze-dried. And then hopefully over time, we can add raw as well. Okay, awesome. I think that's going to be good for today. I was expecting to only do a 30-minute video. Another question I want to answer. Is it true that first-time dog owners should not get a dog like a German Shepherd? So when it comes to being a first-time dog owner, it really depends on how much you plan on investing into your dog. If you have a lot of time to work with your dog, if you're ready to commit, you know, a couple hours every day, if you're learning, if you have a local dog trainer that's going to be helping you, or you studied a bunch of videos, you've done online courses, and you're like, I'm going to put in some work. Can we see Ari? They're hanging out in the room. You know what? Why not? Say hi to Ari and Charlie. Ari always suckles on her blanket. They got their own little room next to my office. But I'll flip it around. You guys can see them. And then we'll end the video for today. So they're hanging out over here. This is their room where they got their beds. We got little Charlie and, of course, Ari. Ari, are you a good girl? But they're probably ready to go to the park because I need to take them to the park. I haven't gone today yet. But all right, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in the next.